In the heart of a silent frontier town, a young widow stood on a rough wooden stage under the burning afternoon sun, her thin hands shaking as the auctioneer's voice echoed across the empty street. Dust swirled around her feet while strangers whispered, some pointing, some laughing. She wasn't a thief nor a criminal. She was a woman the world had decided was broken. Her husband had died, and with him, her hope of being a mother. The townsfolk branded her infertile, useless, and tonight, they were selling her like property. Her chest tightened with shame as each number the auctioneer called felt like a nail in her coffin. She bit her lip, refusing to cry, yet inside, she was crumbling. Who would want a woman the world had thrown away? And then, through the blur of sun and tears, she saw a shadowed figure on horseback ride into the square, changing everything. The young widow stood frozen on the rough wooden stage, her faded gray gown clinging to her trembling frame. She was only 23, yet life had stolen every trace of youth from her face. 2 years ago, her husband's sudden death had left her alone and drowning in whispers. The villagers said she was cursed, barren, a woman who could never give life. Those words had followed her like shadows, until the day the town decided to erase her completely, to pay off debts she had never created. They would auction her as if she were nothing more than an object. Her heart pounded as laughter and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Every stare felt like a knife, every whisper like a scar. She wanted to vanish, to run. But her feet were heavy with shame. In that moment, she realized the world had already buried her long before this auction began. The auctioneer's voice cut through the thick silence, sharp and cold. $50 for the widow, he barked, his tone laced with mockery. The young woman flinched, but kept her chin down, staring at the dusty boards beneath her bare feet. A wave of cruel laughter rolled through the crowd. Men in worn hats and dirty boots leaned toward one another, whispering words that pierced her like arrows. Useless. One muttered, "Can't even give a man a child." Another scoffed. Heat flushed her face, and she wished she could disappear. But the world was determined to watch her break. The auctioneer tried again, voice louder, more impatient. "Come on, gentlemen. She can cook. She can clean. She won't talk back. Who's gonna take her home?" But silence followed, heavy and humiliating. No one raised a hand. Her stomach twisted. Even as property, she was unwanted. She heard a boy snicker, felt the sharp sting of a thrown pebble against her ankle, and the laughter grew. For a moment, she wondered if this was the end, if she would be left standing here, unsold and broken, her shame complete. Then, from beyond the crowd, the rhythmic clop of hooves broke the air. Heads turned. Dust rose in the distance as a lone rider approached the square, his silhouette sharp against the setting sun. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair tied back, a long rifle resting across his saddle. His horse, a black stallion, moved with quiet power, scattering the curious onlookers as it reached the edge of the stage. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Comanche," someone breathed, the word trembling with fear and respect. The young widow dared a glance and caught her breath. His eyes, deep and unreadable, met hers for a fleeting moment. There was no mockery there, no judgment, only something she couldn't name. Without a word, he swung off his horse, boots hitting the dirt with a thud that silenced the square. He stepped forward, every movement calm yet commanding. The auctioneer hesitated, sweat gleaming on his brow. "Sir, you here to bid?" The man didn't answer. He reached into a worn leather pouch at his side and pulled out a small stack of bills, holding them up for all to see. The amount was more than anyone in that town would have offered. A gasp swept the crowd. Murmurs grew frantic. "Why her?" a woman whispered. "What would a Comanche want with a barren widow?" The young woman's heart pounded in confusion and fear. She had expected ridicule, cruelty, maybe even abandonment, but this quiet claim from a stranger was something else entirely. The auctioneer's hammer came down with a crack. "Sold," he barked, his voice shaky. And just like that, her fate shifted. The crowd stared as the Comanche warrior stepped closer, his shadow falling over her small frame. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, only turned to lead his horse and motioned for her to follow. Her legs moved as if in a dream. She didn't know his name, didn't know his intentions. But as she stepped off the stage into the fading light, she felt the first spark of something she hadn't felt in years, uncertain, fragile, and frightening. Hope. The sun had almost slipped behind the horizon when the young widow followed the silent Comanche warrior out of the town. Her heart pounded with every step. Fear and confusion tangled inside her chest. She clutched the edge of her gown, struggling to keep up as his black stallion moved steadily along the dirt road. The town's noise faded into the wind, replaced by the rhythmic sound of hooves and the soft whisper of the evening breeze. She didn't dare ask him where they were going, didn't dare speak at all. Every thought in her head was a question she could not voice. Why had he bought her? What did he want? Hours passed, and the vast plains opened before her eyes, golden fields stretching to the horizon, broken only by clusters of wild trees and distant mountains. Finally, a small ranch appeared, humble but alive with the sound of laughter. Her steps faltered when she saw them, children, 6 of them, running through the tall grass like the wind itself. Their little voices called out in joy, "Papa, Papa." As the warrior approached, the sight struck her like a gentle storm. He was a father, a real one. The children rushed to his horse, clinging to his legs, their faces bright with trust and love. He lifted the youngest, a little girl with braids, into his arms with a soft smile that seemed to melt the hardness from his face. For a moment, the widow forgot her fear and only watched. She had not seen a smile like that in years. He led her to a small cabin beside the main house, opened the door, and gestured for her to enter. Inside was a simple room, a clean bed, a wooden chair, a folded quilt on the corner. He set her small bag, everything she owned, on the table, and finally spoke, his voice deep and calm. "This is your room. Rest. No one will harm you here." She stared, stunned by his gentleness. He turned to leave without another word, only pausing at the door to add, "You are safe, safe." The word echoed in her mind as she sank onto the bed, hands shaking. No man had ever treated her with this quiet respect, not even her late husband. Night settled over the plains, and she listened to the soft sounds of the ranch children laughing in the distance, a horse neighing, the wind against the wooden walls. Questions swirled in her head. Why had he spent so much money to save her from the auction if he didn't demand anything in return? What did a man with 6 children need from a woman like her? Broken and unwanted, the mystery of his intentions was heavier than the silence, and yet, for the first time in years, her heart dared to feel something that both comforted and terrified her. She was not his prisoner. She was not his servant, but she also knew she was not free from the storm he had brought into her life. He knelt beside her, feeling the faint warmth of life still clinging to her skin, and pulled the blanket tighter round her trembling body, the fire's glow chasing shadows across her face. "You're safe now," he said, though the words felt hollow because deep down he knew safety was a lie in these mountains tonight. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment he saw fear flicker in her pale blue eyes before she shut them again, as if the darkness behind them was less terrifying than the world in front of her. He poured a cup of hot water, held it to her lips, and urged her to drink. She swallowed weakly, her breathing uneven, and then, with a voice so faint it was almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire, she spoke. The words were broken pieces, fragments that barely fit together, something about men chasing her, something about a secret they would kill to keep. His chest tightened with every syllable, the weight of what she wasn't saying pressing heavier than the rain still pounding. On the roof, a branch snapped outside, sharp and sudden, and he froze. His hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning against the wall, his eyes fixed on the door as the sound of the wind twisted into something that might have been footsteps. He waited, heart pounding, but the noise faded into the storm, leaving only the sound of her shallow breaths. He turned back to her, brushing wet hair from her face, and saw fresh terror in her eyes, not from the cold or her injuries, but from whatever memory her mind was replaying. "They'll come," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Not just for me, for you." He didn't ask why. The answer was already clear in the way her gaze darted to the window, in the way her fingers gripped the blanket like it was the last barrier between her and death. He stoked the fire, every spark a small defiance against the darkness pressing in, and sat close enough that his presence might anchor her to the moment. But each creak of the cabin's wood, each howl of the wind, made him feel the walls closing in. He had lived years without fearing the night, but now every sound felt like a warning, every shadow like a hand reaching through the cracks. He wanted to tell her she was safe again, but instead he said nothing, because the truth was curling in his gut somewhere out there, in the cold and the dark. Someone knew exactly where they were, and the moment they decided to strike, neither the cabin walls nor the firelight would be enough to keep them alive. The hours crawled by under the storm's endless roar, the fire shrinking into glowing embers while the shadows in the cabin grew taller, bending across the walls like silent watchers. She lay still for a long time, her breathing shallow, her eyes drifting open only to close again as if she were fighting something heavier than sleep. Around midnight, when the wind outside eased to a low moan and the rain became a steady whisper, she spoke again, her voice low but steady this time. "I loved him," she began, staring at the flames instead of his face. He was Apache. Her words cut through the quiet like a blade. She told him how she had met the man by the river, how his kindness had felt different from the cold stares of her own people, how they had met in secret beneath the moonlight, sharing stolen hours in a land that never forgave such choices. Her voice trembled as she described the day they were discovered, the shouts, the hands dragging her away, the look on her lover's face as he was beaten and taken somewhere she could not follow. She had begged for his life, but instead they had marked her, searing the words Apache lover into her flesh as a brand of shame. Her people had cast her out, leaving her to die, and placing her on his roof was no accident. It was a warning, meant to remind him and anyone else who might dare to help her, that some lines could not be crossed without blood being spilled. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the arm of his chair until the wood creaked, the fire popped and hissed, and outside, the night seemed to hold its breath, as if even the mountains were listening. She met his eyes then, and in them he saw not only pain but defiance, a flicker of the same fire that had made her choose love over fear. "They will come for me again," she said, her tone certain, "and if they find me here, they will come for you too." He had no answer, because deep inside he already knew she was right. Every instinct told him to send her away, to close the door and let the world's cruelty pass him by as it always had. But something stronger than instinct kept him still. He had built his life on solitude, on staying far from other people's battles, but now her battle was in his cabin, bleeding into his floor, breathing the same air, and there was no way to separate himself from it. The silence between them stretched, heavy with the truth, until finally he looked away from her wounds and into the dying fire, knowing that before the sun rose, he would have to decide whether to stand with her or leave her to face the darkness. Alone, he studied her in the faint glow of the dying fire, the bruises on her skin telling stories her voice never would, and beneath the pain he saw a strength that had survived more than most men could bear. He knew the choice before him was simple but heavy: help her and earn enemies who would hunt him until his last breath, or turn away and return to the silence he once called peace. But peace had left the moment she fell into his arms. As dawn bled over the mountain peaks, he packed his rifle, a pouch of dried meat, and the blanket that had kept her alive. She stood beside him, unsteady but unbroken. Without a word, they stepped into the cold morning, their shadows stretching toward the unknown. Somewhere ahead, danger waited. Somewhere ahead, war was coming. And for the first time in years, he was ready to fight.